Hello to all of our listeners out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 2 of the Canadian Patriot podcast, recorded November 3, 2015. Joining me this evening, we have Jeff, a married father of one, working as a skilled trade in the construction industry. He's been an avid firearms enthusiast for the last 5 years. He enjoys competing in IPSC, ORA, 3-gun, and cowboy action shooting. Jeff is on the board of directors at his gun club. Tyler, the co-founder and co-host of the International Liberty or Death podcast. He identifies politically as a libertarian. And I'm your host. I'm an instructor, gear reviewer at everydaytactical.com, competitive shooter, and gun club director. We'd like to hear your feedback about the show. Please visit canadianpatriotpodcast.com/feedback or email us at feedback@canadianpatriotpodcast.com. Welcome, Tyler, Jeff. Thank you for joining me again this week. You're our
Thanks for having me back.
panelists. No, I'm happy to have you.
Good to be back with you guys.
So we've got news to go through this week. We've got 2 stories to cover. The main topic for the show is going to be debunking the myth of the old white men are the only people owning guns, which actually is going to be really hard to debunk, I've discovered. We've got a couple of petitions I want to share with the community. And we've got a widget of the week and listener feedback. So we'll try and get this all done in 90 minutes again. I want to thank everybody on YouTube for being with us again this week. Our first YouTube show, the unedited episode 1, got over 400 views in its first week.
Not bad.
I'm very happy with it. The first thing, though, is we do have some feedback. A particular item I'd like to discuss is the name of the podcast. There was some feedback come in that there were some individuals that were unhappy with the use of the word Patriot in the title of this show. Their concern was that not all Patriots are gun owners and not all Patriots are Tory supporters, and they are 100% right. Not all Patriots own guns, nor do they support the Tory party. I'm extremely opposed to statism, big government, limiting ownership of private property, and I understand the freedom haters are fans of manipulating language, so let's look at patriotism. The first thing is a dictionary definition from Collins. Patriotism is the devotion to one's own country and concern for its defense. What the freedom haters are confusing for patriotism is, I think, nationalism. And again, referencing Collins, nationalism is the exaggerated, passionate, or fanatical devotion to a national community, which I think is what the feedback was actually talking about, was they were concerned about nationalism rather than actual patriotism. In order to be able to argue that a person's a patriot, they should be proficient in the use of and have access to arms. Do I believe every person should have a firearm? No. However, it's my opinion that every patriot should support the individual right to own property, including firearms, and every patriot should oppose government monopolies on force. Arms would be needed for a country's defense, and the individual would be required to use those arms. If a country's citizenry can choose to defend that country, then the individuals must also have an inherent right to life, and thus self-defense. This has nothing to do with party politics. Canadians live in a democratic country, and we're able to elect our representatives to that government. Contrary to the feedback that we receive, this podcast will not be a Tory love fest, as we question the policies and morals of every politician and their party. I'd like to close my little rant with 3 quotes. The first from George Orwell. That rifle on the wall of the laborer's cottage or working class flat is the symbol of democracy. It is our job to see that it stays there. The second quote from Winston Churchill. Democracy is the worst form of government except all of the other forms that have been tried. And the third from Mark Twain. Patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. In short, we will not be changing the name of our podcast. We are patriots. And it's up to you to be the true north, strong and free. Jeff, Tyler, your thoughts?
Yeah, that was very well said. I agree with everything 100%. People are too focused on wordage and the use of these words, and I don't think they get the general feel that we were going for.
It always saddens me when I hear people attacking petty items like a word in the podcast name here, rather than the issues that we, for example, discussed in the previous episode. You know, like, I think that people really have failed to get their priorities straight, and it always makes me shake my head when I hear people talking about these petty items as if they matter. It's a word, and I think it's an appropriate word, and I stand by what you just said, Andrew. And just as another note on the Tory Love Fest, the Tories won my riding And in fact, they won every riding that touches my riding. But my particular MP, she does not like me very much. I write her all the time. She always gives me the cold shoulder. And Erica Clark of NFA fame actually met her once in Calgary and described her as no friend of firearms owners.
No, I believe that's true of a lot of politicians, regardless of the party that they're in. They tend to be self-serving individuals. They're not in politics for our best interests. They're there for themselves.
Yeah, no, that couldn't be true. Absolutely. There's very few politicians that are firearm owners and avid gun enthusiasts such as ourselves, and they really don't understand our hobby at all.
No, I don't. I don't think they do, and I don't think that they support that individual right to private property ownership. And I don't think that's necessarily limited to guns. I think that the average politician is in government to be in power, to be able to tell other people what to do and how to do it.
Yep.
Absolutely. Like, pro-liberty, pro-freedom types generally are unattracted to these types of jobs because they have no interest in ruling over people. And that's why we end up with the government that we have.
Absolutely.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. With that, on to the news. First item that we'd like to look at comes to us from Dawn.com. Brazil to end its restrictions on gun ownership, which I think is actually a little bit of a misnomer in the title. The way that I understand it, Brazil has a draft on the books that's going to its lower house of Congress this month to modify their firearms ownership laws. Currently, anyone in Brazil that wants to buy a gun has to obtain a license on a case-by-case basis, so each firearm is individually licensed, and I'm not exactly sure on the details of how that works. I think it's through their federal police system, the equivalent of the RCMP in Brazil, but I'm not able to read Brazilian. I guess that's probably not the right language. Portuguese?
Portuguese.
Portuguese? Yeah. I don't read that, so trying to do research on this topic was somewhat difficult. The draft law, however, the draft law contains language to allow anyone over the age of 21, including people accused of committing less serious crimes, would be allowed to purchase up to 9 firearms a year and 50 rounds of ammunition per month. Which, I mean, is at the same time, fist bump, go Brazil, good on you for letting your citizens have guns, but also you can only buy 50 rounds of ammunition a month. That's
not nearly enough to be proficient with the firearm.
No, I can't think of an occasion where I go to the range and shoot less than 50 rounds, and I'm at the range on a weekly basis at minimum.
Yeah, so, that's true.
Again, this is coming from Dawn.com, and I'm not clear on how reliable they are, but they had one of the better English articles on the subject.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always good news, right? I mean, it's obviously not the most perfect system, but if it is becoming more free and the new system that they might be in the future adopting, should this pass, if that recognizes people's rights to self-defense and right to life, then that's, of course, a step in the right direction. So,
absolutely. Yeah, it says in this article here that at present, weapons can only be bought legally by people obtaining a license on a case-by-case basis. That's kind of the same situation we have in Canada right now. I mean, concealed carry is legal in Canada. It's got to be approved by your local chief firearms officer, which it's never approved. So, yeah, hopefully they broaden their acceptance and allow more people to conceal carry than Canada does.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to see where this goes. I'm not very familiar with Brazil's parliamentary procedure, but if this goes through their Congress and becomes law and is implemented, I'm very interested to see what happens to violent crime. Brazil has an incredibly high homicide rate right now, and I think part of that is the difficulty for their law-abiding citizenry to be able to defend themselves with firearms, because it is so challenging in their country to own guns.
Mm-hmm.
So the criminals and the gangsters have firearms, the police and the military have firearms, but the average Brazilian does not. So I'd like to see where this ends up going. They have, as it stands now, they have 40,000 gun-related deaths a year in Brazil. So if this law comes into effect and the average Brazilian is able to obtain a firearm and carry it for self-defense, I'm very interested to see where they end up going, if that number goes up or down, or if it goes up if it's a very steep increase in the first year while the gangsters and criminals are eliminated.
Well, you know, another portion of this article, or a part of this article, they say, but opponents fear that Brazil's orgy of gun violence would simply spin further out of control. It's a return to the Wild West. Um, that reminds me, in the United States, when concealed carry was starting to spread, a lot of the local law enforcement got together and they all thought that it would be the Wild West as well. And a lot of them are interviewed 10, 20 years later, and they've all agreed that concealed carry has not been the Wild West free-for-all shootout that it was once projected to be, and that in fact it's been quite successful. Of course, the media doesn't pick up on that.
No, naturally.
Yeah. And if there's 40,000 gun deaths a year there, it kind of sounds like it's already the Wild West.
Well, at the very least, it's the OK Corral, and everybody that's there is getting shot.
Yeah.
But
we'll be watching this one closely.
Definitely.
I'm sure you guys are familiar with Panama kind of following suit and seeking to open up its gun laws as well. These hotspots in Central and South America where they have lots of violence and very firmly entrenched and wealthy drug gangs with the violence that comes with it. When these countries change their gun laws, these are the places to watch, because we'll be able to see the changes in the homicide rates, the changes in the gang activity, and etc. And we'll be able to use this as ammunition when we try to change things here in Canada.
Definitely. So I think this is something that we'll pay attention to. I'm going to have to find a way to figure out how to follow Brazilian news without learning how to read Portuguese. The next item on the news this evening, the proposed Ontario Municipal Land Transfer Tax. Currently in Ontario, the Liberal government is considering the option of giving municipalities individual control over land transfer taxes. So in Ontario, when you buy a home, you have to pay a land transfer tax to the province, and it's a percentage of the value of the home, and it's tiered based on the home's value. So the short version is under $250,000, you pay 1%. Over $400,000, you pay 2%, and that's just part of your closing cost, and it goes right to the province. The exception to this is in Toronto. They already have a municipal land transfer tax in place, and I believe it's been in place since 2008. It might be 2006. I believe it's 2008. And it, in effect, doubles the land transfer tax fee. So in Toronto, the strata is slightly different, but a house of starting at $55,000, like you can find a house in Toronto for less than $55,000, to that $400,000 mark is 1%, and then any property valued over $400,000 is 2%, the same as what you're paying to the province. So in essence, this is a 4% tax on the cost of a home in Toronto.
That's ludicrous.
Well, it's absolutely insane, but Toronto's been using it as a source for additional revenue for the last 6 or 8 years. The average works out to something that the land transfer tax on the average home work out to something like $10,200. If this goes out to other municipalities, it means that not only are you paying this additional 2% in Toronto, you're going to be paying it conceivably everywhere, because I can't imagine why a municipality would turn down the opportunity to increase their tax revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's never enough money. All these levels of government, they'll never have enough.
No, exactly. I mean, it's another way for the municipality to fund themselves, but I can't hardly imagine a municipality is going to see this as a way to, I don't know, pay down their debt or work on repairing infrastructure or reducing hydro costs or any of the other things that would benefit those new homeowners. I was looking at the Ontario Real Estate Association website. They've got a page up called don'ttaxmydream.ca with a 90-second video that's quite informative about the process. The Ontario Real Estate Association is opposed to this tax because they're saying it's going to limit the ability for new homeowners to be able to buy those homes, and they're talking about losing something to the effect of $2 billion in economic activity and in excess of 15,000 jobs just by adding this new 2% tax on home sales in Ontario.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Your home is probably, for most people, the largest and most significant purchase they'll ever make in their lives. And to make that more expensive when the price of housing is already risen to, quite frankly, an insane level, it just shocks me. And this doesn't shock me in the sense that it comes from the Ontario government, because if there's one thing that they are good at, it's finding new and interesting ways to tax people. But it's like what Jeff said. It's never enough. The municipalities, of course, they're not going to turn down the opportunity to add a new revenue stream, and then it's just simply going to go into general revenues, and it's going to be a part of the budget. It's never going to go away once it passes.
No, absolutely. My fear is that if a municipality has the option to add this tax, it is just another line item, and if they don't spend it this year, they're going to worry that they won't have it next year due to the way that they do that whole zero-sum budget. Mm-hmm. So they have to spend that money, and I don't think that they're going to choose to spend that money wisely, like reducing their debt payment.
No, this is going to allow them to increase the size of government. That's all it's going to do.
Absolutely.
Because the zero-sum thing, what it does is it creates an incentive for them to spend the money. So, if your motive is to spend it, not necessarily use it in a way that is most productive, then it just ends up wasted.
Yeah. But where's the outcry? Who's raising the cry about this? Is where are the taxpayers rallying about this?
Well, the Ontario Taxpayers Federation did have an article that I read about it, and like I said, the Ontario Real Estate Association has a really good website with information in a 90-second video and a petition on don'ttaxmydream.ca. But this is not something the mainstream media is covering, and I don't expect it's going to be something the mainstream media covers. I figure that people like Tyler or I go to buy houses in the next couple of years, and this is just going to be part of our closing costs, and we're just going to have to figure out how to pay another $10,000 on the price of a home.
Well, and you don't buy a house in Toronto, so you pay that extra tax.
Well, and I mean, that's already an incentive, aside from the fact that I don't want to live in Toronto, and I don't understand why people would. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There are valid reasons, I suppose, to live in Toronto, but none of them apply to my situation, and I can't imagine changing my life that I would want to live in that municipality. But this will eliminate the competition of other municipalities. Like, as an individual, you're no longer going to have an incentive. If you live in Toronto and commute from Mississauga or commute from Ajax, if Ajax and Mississauga are going to add this same tax, well, you may as well live closer so you can cut down your cost of commuting.
Well, ideally, in a free market, there would be a municipality that would notice this and say, you know what, we're not going to jump on the bandwagon. We're not going to raise taxes or create new taxes. And that would create a migration to their location. But, we don't have a free market. Our government interferes at all levels, and this is the result.
Definitely. So, I think that sort of beats that one to death. The next item on the agenda this evening are two additional petitions. I've already talked about don'ttaxmydream.ca, which I think everyone should visit, and at the very least read the information from the Ontario Real Estate Association, even if they decide not to sign that petition. The other two petitions I want to talk about, the first one is petitioning Parkland County Council, Park and County Mayor, Save Our Gun Club, and this is at change.org, and there'll be a link in the show notes. And this is for a gun club that is being threatened with closure. I think they've already been told they're no longer allowed to shoot there at this point. This is for the Spruce Grove Gun Club, which has been in Parkland County since 1972, and they've been told they have 30 days to appeal a board decision. They've got 900 members, and all of those people have been told they're no longer allowed to shoot at a club that's been there for 40-odd years.
I mean, how outrageous is that? When I used to live in Waterloo, I was shopping around for a club, and I went and visited a club called, I believe it was called Pioneer Sportsman, and it had been there since 1928, I believe, until a subdivision full of millionaires from Toronto went up next to it. And this is land that people bought knowing there was a shooting range close by. What they did is, obviously they didn't like the noise, they didn't care for the activity, they just started lawyering the gun club to death. They took them to court over frivolous suits and until the gun club ran out of money and just couldn't afford to defend itself anymore. So they ended up having to buckle and cave, and now they only have indoor shooting at a handgun range now.
Isn't that ridiculous? Like,
yeah.
Could you imagine the stupidity of somebody if they were to move in next to, say, Pearson Airport in Toronto, and then if they were a collective of millionaires like that, petition the Greater Toronto Airports Authority to shut down Pearson?
Yeah, and well, that's crazy because we live in a society. We live in a society today where if you're wealthy enough, you can buy your own justice. I'll just give you a quick story about my uncle. He lived in Muskoka. He had this kind of low-lying swampland at the back of his property, and I believe it was 4 other pieces of property butted into him at that point, and some beavers constructed a dam there, flooded the area to a certain extent, but it was land that none of the people were using, and it was my uncle's opinion that they should just let them be. They're not bothering anybody, the land isn't being used, just let them be. But his neighbors wanted to eliminate the beavers. They wanted to have somebody come in and get rid of them. And it ended up in court, and my uncle's lawyer told him, he said, look, all these guys are millionaires from Toronto, you can't win. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong, you're not going to win. And he actually ended up moving over the incident.
Wow.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
So anyway, for our listeners, if you check the show notes, we'll have a link to change.org. Save Our Gun Club. They're at 1,500 supporters, and let's try and get them as much support as we can. The second petition I want to look at is directed at petitioning Prime Minister-elect of Canada. Same thing en français. Mr. Trudeau, please leave Canada's firearms alone. This is currently over 30,000 supporters. Again, I'd like to see this reach as many gun owners, as many Patriot-loving Canadians, as many Canadian-loving patriots as possible. We'll put a link in change.org for this one. But the petition is, in very simple terms, explaining to Mr. Trudeau that Canadian firearms owners, law-abiding Canadians, are not the problem, and that the Liberal Party policy shouldn't be targeting private property. It should be directed towards people who break laws, and that is not the PAL-holding, gun-owning public at large.
It's easier to create lawbreakers through legislation than it is to actually go after dangerous people.
Absolutely. Going after dangerous people would be an awful lot like doing work, and the government is rather opposed to doing anything that would be actual work.
Yeah. I found this interesting. I was reading through Trudeau's 32-point party plan, his collection of campaign promises, and I noticed that firearms were not on the agenda. Now, obviously, their firearms policy is there and viewable on the Liberal website, but it's not on their list of campaign promises. So I'm wondering kind of what we can expect in these next 4 years. I believe he gets sworn in tomorrow, does he not?
I think tomorrow is the big day.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what we can expect if we go incident-free in the next 4 years, where we might see minimal changes, if any at all, because if it's not in their party plan for the next 4 years, it's clearly not a priority on their agenda.
Which actually almost makes me a happy person, because it shouldn't be a priority, especially with the number of campaign promises for change that Mr. Trudeau campaigned on.
Mm-hmm.
Attacking law-abiding Canadians is not the type of change that I think the Liberal government wants to be making.
Exactly.
Well, maybe they'll just focus on the whole marijuana issue, and and we'll just be, forgotten. We'll just be left to the side.
I'm very interested in what's going to happen with the marijuana laws and changing the recreational use of marijuana in Canada. I think we should actually. I was talking to Tyler about this during the pre-show. I'd actually very much like to do a show just on legalizing marijuana and government control of specific substances. Just because that whole topic into itself is fascinating. And you're right. I think that messing with law-abiding gun owners right now is not a priority for the Liberals. They're spread pretty thin on their other campaign promises. And as long as guns stay out of the media, as long as we don't have another attack on Parliament or another incident like a shooting at the War Memorial, as long as there's nothing else like that that makes national news for weeks on end, I think the populace, the people that generally voted for the Liberals, are just going to forget that we own guns in Canada.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if anything, I kept saying that the worst we can expect is, some RCMP stooge to go up to the new public safety minister and say, this is a list of scary guns and we want them all restricted or prohibited. And then with the stroke of a pen, it can be done. That's what scares me. But, most of these guns that they want to be restricted or prohibited are obviously non-restricted, so they don't even know where they are. So good luck with that.
So, with the new gun law, I'm sorry, I don't recall the number. Was it C? It's not C-42. That's the original gun law from '95. What was the change that the Harper government just made?
Okay, C-68 was the gun law from '95. C-42 is the Common Sense Firearms Licensing Act.
Okay, 42 was the new one. Excellent. So the Common Sense Licensing Act, did that not have a provision in law to prevent the RCMP from making arbitrary changes? Don't those have to go through orders in council now?
Yeah, the RCMP, they could only make a reclassification if they had, documentation or something to go along with it that would demonstrate that the gun originally belonged in a particular firearms classification to begin with. They couldn't just, for example, say the 1022 is restricted because we don't like it. There would have to be, it would either basically have to be non-restricted or prohibited, because the only thing that can make a gun restricted other than its dimensions or being named in the legislation is the government declaring it to be so. So the RCMP never had that authority. The worry is that because the laws are so loosely written and there's really no objective criteria to determine whether a gun can be readily or easily convertible to fire in a fully automatic fashion, that the RCMP could simply say that the gun is readily or easily converted to fire in a fully automatic fashion, and then make it prohibited just because it's their opinion. So what C-42 did was it kind of took that discretionary authority away from the RCMP, and Public Safety Minister Blaney, I'm not sure how this was actually accomplished, but he made a declaration saying that once a firearm had been classified in a particular classification category for a year, it was stuck there no matter what. And that was obviously to avoid what had happened with the 858 and the Swiss Arms from ever taking place again, where something had been freely traded on the market for 9, 10, 11, 12 years with no problems, and then all of a sudden the RCMP creates a class of criminals, 10,000+ strong in number. But what C-42 also did was it added something that didn't previously exist in law, which was it gave the government the authority to declare a gun non-restricted, even if it satisfied the requirements or it satisfied the criteria to be either a restricted or prohibited firearm, which the Swiss Arms and 858 platform allegedly are. So that ability never existed previously in law. The government could only declare a gun to be restricted or prohibited, but never non-restricted. So the thing is, though, if you look at the Liberal Party website, they say that they will repeal C-42. So all those protections that the Conservatives worked, quite hard to get through Parliament and provide for us, as soon as the Liberals have the political capital to do so, they will do it.
But Tyler, wouldn't the Liberals have to show some kind of cause for this? I mean, wouldn't they have to point to some kind of stats and say, look, the previous government was incorrect in passing this legislation. Look what's happened, which you and we all know that nothing has happened. I mean, I can't believe that they would even try such a move.
Well, they just need to drum up the fear machine. They have a lot of loyal police chiefs who have demonstrated their willingness to get up in front of a camera and lie to the Canadian people and claim that we're dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, they did this during the Act to repeal the gun registry hearings. They said that this would reduce public safety in Canada and et cetera. Like they just were bold-faced liars because they didn't like to see their empire of control come crumbling down. And that's kind of what's going to happen if they ever decide to get rid of C-42. And it's low-hanging fruit. Like it's an easy sell to the Canadian people who have demonstrated their willingness to accept these forms of petty tyranny in the past. Because you can say, well, we just want to add some controls and restrictions on the use of handguns. Or we want to, they just need to throw up a couple pictures of AR-15s or other scary-looking rifles and say that they're just trying to control this and it's in everybody's best interest, and everybody will give them a pass.
Yeah, that's fair.
There'll be a million of us, of course, the million some odd restricted license holders, and however many non-restricted license holders there are who have, particular guns that might be affected by this, they'll be upset. But really, we're a small number of people in this country. No, and to the Liberals, we're mostly people who would never vote for them anyway. So what do they care if they piss us off?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and you're right. We don't have the media on our side, so the truth is never presented to the average Canadian.
That's true. Now, if you go through the Liberal Party's plan, they make the claim that they will only be pursuing evidence-based policy. So if they stand by that, then we're quite fine on the gun front, because we know that all forms of gun control are just expensive sideshows that produce no tangible benefit to public safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting 4 years.
That's for sure.
And I think we should all work to get as many new shooters involved and licensed people while they are still issuing RPALs and PALs.
Yep.
And that should be our priority for every person in Canada with a PAL.
Mm-hmm.
Get new shooters, because the more new shooters, I think that's our should be our goal for all firearms owners.
So,
I agree with that totally. And spoiler alert: Episode 3's main topic will be introducing non-shooters to the sport.
I didn't mean to go off on this side rant here, but to answer your question, Andrew, yes, the RCMP would have to petition the government, and the government would have to draft an order in council to declare certain guns to be either restricted or prohibited. But the RCMP, we know, due to leaked documents, that the RCMP has had several rifles on their watch list, such as the Ruger SR-22, the Robinson Arms XCR, the Bushmaster ACR, the Tavor, the Keltec RFB, all these black rifles that have, what they say, slipped through the cracks, but really just based on the objective criteria defined by law, these guns are non-restricted.
They slipped through the cracks. I mean, they were issued FRTs.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It's not like when they say slip through the cracks, they make it sound as if, it was smuggled into the country and we didn't notice.
Well, that's it's very deliberately chosen wording, because they want to make it seem to the public that these guns were always destined to be restricted or prohibited, and that's the way they should be, and only due to some administrative error or because the evil conservatives were at the helm, that these guns are now free and circulating in Canadian society. They don't want to own it and be responsible and say, actually, it was our party that wrote the law in the first place and defined this criteria. But that's the way it is. So that is one thing that I will expect from this government, in that they kept saying that the firearms classification, rubric was meant to be constantly updated as new gun designs came onto the market. And I think that given the right opportunity, given the political capital, they won't hesitate to pass the order in councils making the XCR, the ACR, the RFB, the Tavor, the T97, all those guns restricted.
Well,
and we all know
the policy. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, we all know how many crimes were committed with all those firearms you just mentioned.
Exactly, it's a big priority for this government.
Yeah, a lot of banks have been robbed with Tavors.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the problem with the left side government right now, is let no good tragedy go to waste. No one's robbed a bank with a Tavor, but as soon as someone does, that gun will be prohibited.
Yeah, well, yeah. Like I said last week, that unfortunately with the death of that soldier at Parliament Hill, he was shot with a hunting rifle, and the media.
No, I'm sorry. Wendy Sukier says that was an old duck gun.
That's right.
And clearly, the people at the Coalition for Firearms Control know what they're talking about. They are. You can't see this for the audio listeners. Experts. I'm doing air quotes.
Yeah, we need to take her out shooting and get her hooked.
Some people are such lost cause they don't even think it's worth the ammo.
Hmm.
On that, we'll put links to the change.org petitions in the show notes. I would really like to see the Mr. Trudeau leave firearms alone hit 100,000 people. It's more than a quarter of the way there, so we'll put that in the show notes. The main topic for this evening's show, which I guess I'm going to go ahead and hit the button labeled hypocrisy right now. The topic for the show is debunking the myth that only old white men own guns, and we've managed to get one old and 3 white men on the show. Everyone else I asked turned it down due to scheduling conflicts. Apparently people have lives and they couldn't devote 90 minutes to talking about their interest in firearms.
I think maybe an appropriate stereotype would be only old white men do podcasts about guns, but it's pretty clear to me that that definitely is not true when you go to certainly the gun clubs that I've been in, the training classes that I've taken part in, and some of the groups of hunters that I've shot with and hunted with.
No, definitely. And I was trying to do the research for the main topic this evening, and I wound up on the justice.gc.ca website. And the reason I couldn't find any statistics on Canadian firearms ownership broken down by demographic is we don't pay for it. Apparently, we haven't done any studies in the past 5 years about gun ownership in this country, which I am absolutely astounded by because of the amount of money that we give to people at, let's say, Ryerson University that work for a certain coalition, and we don't give any money to actual scientific research about how guns are used.
Well, you don't need research, Andrew. When you want to ban them, you don't need research. You just
the facts just get in the way of your agenda.
That's right. Well, you automatically know that they're bad.
I think that's my point. Is I'm being pragmatic and trying to use facts and logic, and unfortunately, I can't make an emotional argument on this subject because it's not something that needs an emotional argument. It's a mechanical device. It works a certain way, and it's up to the person using it to decide how it's used, the same as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did find some good stats. So with 95% of firearms owning households in Canada, those households own firearms. So conceivably, those households are not limited to old white men, or in our case, Tyler, just white men, because I'm not old yet.
I don't think I'm old yet. I haven't cracked 30, so.
Yeah, no, neither have I, sir. And I think for the time being, we're not able to be considered old white men, just white men. So, I mean, I'm sure we suffer from white privilege and a myriad of other diseases.
Oh, I'm sure. I didn't catch you at the meeting last week, though.
The white privilege meeting?
Yeah, the meeting of privileged white people.
No, I'm afraid I was busy working. I couldn't make the meeting. Somebody has to pay for it.
I'll have to verify your white privilege next time I see you, and you have to give me the secret handshake.
I'll show you how much money the government takes off my income now. So, 95% of firearms owning households conceivably are not old white men, but they do own long guns, and 12% of those homes own handguns, which I was actually surprised that the number of handgun owners wasn't higher. And of course, this is on the justice.gc.ca website and doesn't actually explain if it's a restricted firearm like an AR-15 or actually a handgun. Because I'd be interested to see if we have a number of people that own rifles that are restricted, but they're muddying the statistics.
Mm. Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I'd be interested for a more detailed breakdown for sure. People often ask me, I speak with a lot of Americans and I visit the U.S. often, and people often ask me what the gun culture is here, and it's always helpful to have that kind of information to give to people, because I remember one time I was in a gun shop in Virginia, and I was explaining that Robinson Arms produces the XCR with a Canadian compliant barrel, just for our market, just so it would be non-restricted. And the guy was shocked. He was just like, there are enough people in Canada buying guns that they'll, make an entirely different model of gun for you. And this guy, Americans, like 2/3 of them don't have passports. They don't travel a lot. But this guy, he was quite shocked. And it's always nice to kind of go around and shake hands with these guys. And, it's just say, hey, man, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, I mean, this kind of, I can understand from the American's perspective when we're strictly at a consumer level, we're talking about 2 million people that buy a product. less than half of those people are going to be able to buy the restricted versions. The fact that a company like Robinson is willing to make a special run of barrels so they can sell their product to those 2 million people, that's a pretty significant capital expense on their part.
Yep.
Yep. Doesn't Ruger do the same thing with their revolver, their GP100?
Yep.
Yeah, they added an extra 20 millimeters or something to it and made a Canadian legal model.
Well, they were thinking of the children, right?
Yeah.
Well, naturally. It's harder to conceal. It's 20 millimeters longer.
That extra quarter inch of rifling puts that spin on the bullet that causes it to, fly around children.
Terrible. Another useful stat that I found on the Justice GC website was that 26% of Canadian households own at least one firearm, which, in my estimation, doesn't mesh with the 2 million PAL holders. There's got to be way more households than 2 million, because that would limit us to having 8 million households in the country, and that seems like it's a.
No, I believe it's 10 million households. So they're saying at least 2.6 million households have guns in them, and yet there's only 1.9 some odd million PAL holders.
Yeah, so the numbers there don't quite add up to me.
Yeah.
But again, we're looking at a government website on statistics, so I'm not really surprised they haven't muddied the waters.
Now, this is actually interesting because, as I recall, the estimated number of gun owners in Canada back in '95 was anywhere from 5 to 7 million. And the estimated number of guns in the country was upwards of 20 million. And now these statistics are telling a different story. And so I look at these things and I wonder, if only 2 million people ended up getting a PAL, and there were anywhere from 5 to 7 million gun owners estimated to be in the country, then we're looking at a government now that wants to save face from the embarrassment of mass noncompliance. And I'm wondering if there isn't a little bit of that at play in these statistics.
Well, I think there has to be, because you're right. I did see that there were numbers for the original registry that they estimated 7 million people had guns and less than 2 million people complied with getting their PALs. So, I mean, those guns have to go somewhere. They didn't leave the country. I imagine a lot of them are in barns and attics, and people don't remember they put them away, or their children inherited and don't know that. So those guns have definitely still got to be around. The ones that are still on the books right now, everything that's in the handgun, the restricted registry that's been around since '34, that contributes to a very small number of firearms overall for what's been imported into the country.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's funny with that information in hand? I would be curious to see how many of these guns that were never reported or never recorded or never registered were ended up used in a crime or a commission of a crime versus the guns that we all know have been brought illegally across the border, smuggled through various routes.
And that's the vast majority of guns that are used in crimes in this country are ones that are smuggled in illegally, predominantly from the United States. But yeah, the statistics just are not there. I really wish that our government would spend a little bit of money on putting out actual scientific research about this topic if they want to have an informed electorate.
Well,
I know that's
you're
counterproductive.
about to upset
to
Tyler by saying you wish the government would spend money.
I know, but if the government is going to spend something, the government's going to spend money regardless.
Yeah.
I would wish that because the statistics are there if the data was collated and published.
Mm-hmm.
Well, have no fear, because I heard this morning on the news that Trudeau, one of the first things he plans on doing, besides being away for the first month of his term in office, is that he's going to bring back the long-form census. So maybe we can anticipate that in this new long-form census there'll be questions about firearms.
And I hope every single person ignores those questions.
Yeah, which non-restricted do you own? Did you sell it to, what was his name in Canmore?
Mike in Canmore.
Wow.
That's right.
Mike has a lot of firearms. I'd like to go and visit his place in Canmore sometime.
Yeah.
There's a guy at my gun club that nobody likes, so everybody jokes and says that they sold all their guns to this guy.
Oh, boy.
Go knock on his door. He's actually dating a cop, so that would get interesting if it ever came to that.
That is pretty funny.
But we actually kind of brought this up on my podcast an episode or two ago. We were talking about Michael Schmidt, the dairy farmer, and how absurd it was that the Ontario government was spending all these resources trying to shut him down because he had the nerve to sell raw milk to people that wanted it. And you just think about the round-the-clock surveillance, the cameras, the teams deploying
the millions of
yeah,
dollars in
just
expenses.
millions and millions and millions of dollars to police this guy to get his compliance, and yet we've got guns streaming across the border to criminal gangs that shoot at each other in the streets and otherwise hurt and kill people. That's not a priority, but this dairy farmer is.
Well,
And
didn't you say it earlier, Tyler? I think that you had mentioned that it was easier to make criminals than to enforce existing laws.
Well, absolutely. That is the way government has conditioned me to believe based on their behavior.
Yeah, sad but true.
It's a lot easier to make criminals and go after them, go after demographics where you can get compliance, go after demographics where they're not going to shoot back at you. You can show up on their doorstep and push them around. And then, the stats on paper, they end up looking pretty good because you've apprehended X number of people and you've put X number of people behind bars, and you get to seize all their assets, because they're proceeds of crime, the crime that you just made up a month ago. And it all looks good on paper. But at the same time, real criminals, they establish vast empires and they get wealthy. And once they get wealthy enough, then they get in bed with government, and then they never go away.
Yep.
So the other piece of actual facts that I wanted to bring up before we go on to the anecdotal stuff about what we see in the community is a report that I got from the National Shooting Sports Foundation in the U.S. Of a survey of 1,000 female gun owners, and it did bring up a couple of interesting numbers that I thought we should visit.
Mm-hmm.
With 42% of those women being identifying as being rural gun owners, and only 39% being urban. Again, the math doesn't quite line up. Some people clearly are not sure if they are urban or rural, but 39-1 versus 42-8, I mean, that's such a small divide. The rural-urban issue that certain politicians keep bringing up about gun ownership is, at least in this example from the NSSF, non-existent. Like 3%, that may as well be a statistical error.
Here's one thing. What always got me was that they like to act as if, being rural means that you don't live in like these massive metropolises. But I would disagree. I know plenty of people. I mean, I'm one of them, where I live in a small community, a small town, entirely surrounded by farmland, no real heavy industry or anything like that. But I don't farm. These people that I know, they don't farm. They live in small towns, sure, and people from Toronto might look at it as a rural setting, but they like to make this a farmer, versus the urbanites type thing. And they always say hunters and farmers when they talk about the demographics when they're discussing the long gun registry type issues. And these are just regular people. Then they might work service sector jobs, or they might work in a factory, or they might be self-employed. And this whole urban rural thing, it always gets me, because a lot of these people that live outside of these huge urban metropolises, I know, even though they're outside of these 500,000 people cities, they're not embracing a rural lifestyle. They live in a home with air conditioning. They drive a Civic. They're not tilling the fields at 5 a.m. Like it's just that I don't get it. And I think what it is, the language I believe is designed to tell people in Canada that there are two distinct cultures.
Absolutely.
The gun owning culture is separate from you.
It's intentionally divisive politics.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to make that fake divide between the electorate than it is to actually talk about a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
Which seems like it's almost the theme of the show this evening, is the government would rather do things that are easy and produce measurable results than actually doing real hard work that makes a real, wait for the buzzword, change.
And I think obviously the guns that they would go after first, the handguns and the ARs, most guys that I know that own those guns, they live in cities.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it doesn't stand to reason that a farmer would have an AR-15. He can't shoot it on his own property to use it for pest control, despite the AR-15 being a fantastic gopher gun.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that the farmers and hunters wouldn't have those kind of firearms. They can't use them to enjoy their particular lifestyle.
Well,
So the NSSF, that's a mouthful and a half, was sort of some interesting stats on just on female firearm ownership, but in the United States. I guess the point that we're at now with the main topic will have to be the part that I don't like is the anecdotal stuff, the stuff that we see amongst the community, because there are no measurable numbers on this stuff. So what are your opinions on, how do you phrase this question? How many old white men own guns in our community versus how many not old white men?
well, I'll chime in. Andrew and I are both members at the same club, and our club has a lot of old white men. I guess you would, they'd be stereotypical hunters. They've been hunting for ages, and they know everything about hunting. They're into obscure calibers, old Winchester firearms, and they're what most people think about when they think about gun guys. They all look like somebody's granddad, and they all drive old vehicles, and wear plaid jackets. And Andrew and I don't think you hunt, do you, Andrew? And
No,
I don't
I
hunt.
don't hunt.
And we're more into competition. Well, we're into a lot of different types of shooting. And our club is kind of divided amongst newer, younger people like ourselves, or sort of like Andrew, and people that are into the, I don't want to say tactical, but more of the competition, like IPSC, ORA, OP, ODPL, what else? Three
Well, yeah,
gun.
definitely. We have well, actually, so Tyler, I know what Jeff shoots, and we can recap what him and I both shoot. But what competitive disciplines are you involved in? I know you hunt, because I've listened to your episodes about Gobblergeddon.
The Gobblergeddon that wasn't this year. I failed to harvest a turkey this spring, but no, I do hunt. I rarely find time for it. I'm actually staring at my deer tag right now on my desk. Still haven't been out deer hunting this year. But no, we shoot at my club. We do all the action shooting sports. We don't really affiliate ourselves with any official sanctioned league or anything like that. But we do. We have an IDPA style league that we run between our club, Sydenham Sportsman, and a neighboring club, North Grey Bruce Rod and Gun. And so we have a handful of competitors from our club and their club, and we do matches at each other's clubs. And we're reaching out to other guys in the area like Port Elgin and all people up in my neck of the woods around Owen Sound. And so we do a lot of handgun, and we try and put together 3 or 4 shotgun matches a year. And starting next spring, as soon as I'm done writing the curriculum for the safety course, we will be doing multi-gun with rifle. Nice. So I just got to make sure everybody's on the same page with slinging a rifle and doing it safely and transitioning to your secondary and etc. So I got to put that together, and that's a winter project for me. But that's what we do. We try and do it all.
So Tyler, what's the makeup of the guys you're shooting with doing this kind of shooting action?
Well, members of my club, I would say, are overwhelmingly white men between the ages of 40 and 60. But as for the people that come out and do the shooting sports that I'm most actively engaged in, my girlfriend shoots both shotgun and handgun. She's a member of my club as well. We've got an Indian guy from Kitchener. He's a chiropractor. He comes out, has a great time, shoots handgun and shotgun. He wants to get into the AR stuff too. He just bought one, and an XCR, and an XCR-M. He's got deep pockets. And we've got a black guy who actually moved here from California who showed up, and he shows up regularly to the matches but not the practices because he lives a little too far away. A handful of other ladies that come out and shoot. Like it's certainly, as far as gun owners go, it's a very diverse group of people. It's certainly not the makeup that you would expect walking into it. And I want to give you a story. Once upon a time, I grew up in Oakville, right? So I didn't grow up around guns. I didn't grow up around gun culture. My father didn't hunt. Nobody I knew hunted, nothing. At least nobody talked about it. And so my sister, she obviously had no connection with gun culture, and she lives like deep in Toronto. I decided to take her and my brother-in-law out shooting one year because for Christmas they said they just wanted to spend time with the family members. They didn't want any material goods. So they came out, and they came out to my old club down in Waterford, and they were blown away by what they saw because they were expecting exactly what we're talking about. They were expecting it just to be an old, white man's club. And when they got there, there were 3 generations of a family shooting together the entire afternoon. There was a guy with a wife who was from, the Middle East somewhere, and then their child, and it was an eye-opening experience for them, because it totally destroyed the stereotypes that they had in their minds of what Canada's gun culture was. And the truth is that it's a very diverse group of people.
Well, it is diverse, and I think that we're sort of limited to the area geographically with those demographics. So Jeff and I both belong to a club that's near Toronto. It's, what is it, Jeff? 45 minutes from Mississauga?
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, 45 minutes from Mississauga.
And you guys shoot where? Guelph?
We're both members at Guelph. We have a lot of people that come to the Guelph Gun Club from the Greater Toronto area. We have a huge group of people from Mississauga, Brampton, Oakville, Orangeville, that sort of the I guess you'd call that the western half of the GTA. We've got people that come from right downtown Toronto, because we're basically the easiest drive from Toronto. We're one of the closest and most well-rounded clubs in the area, because we have indoor and outdoor, we have rifle, handgun, shotgun, we have trap, and we have a lot of disciplines. We have IPSC ODPL, RIDPA League. We've got the trap, we've got cowboy action shooting. We're in the process of putting up a 50-yard indoor rifle range in addition to our 25-yard indoor handgun range. And we're an incredibly inexpensive club. So they don't have to drive far, they don't have to pay very much, and they can basically shoot whatever they want. So we see a lot of the demographic that reflects the demographic of the GTA. We see a lot of people that are, obviously, we see a lot of white people. That's common. We see a lot of Indian people. We see a lot of Hispanic people. We see a huge Filipino population at our club. There's a large number of IPSC shooters from our club. When we go to IPSC matches, we see a lot of, obviously, white people are a big theme at the clubs in this area in Southern Ontario. Jeff and I both travel around to do IPSC and IDPA and different outlaw matches in this area. And it's the thing that we don't see, or at least that I don't see, is a lot of female shooters at these matches. We see a lot of different ethnic groups, but we see everybody's pretty much in the same demographic. It's men between their middle to late 20s and their late 40s to early 50s. That seems to be the demographic. There's very few women, but there's people with a lot of different geographic backgrounds. We have a lot of we have a lot of Asian people. We have a lot of a lot of European people, a lot of Asian people. We have some African, Caribbean people. We have a few South American people that you see, but it is predominantly white. But it seems to be more of a demographic thing, that it's people that are just past that. They've got disposable income and they haven't quite got families yet, or their kids are kind of getting into middle school or high school, and they've got some free time in their lives, and they're back into getting into shooting.
I mean, that's a reality that we're dealing with. The factors that government has imposed on enjoying the shooting sports in this country basically guarantees that you won't be participating in the shooting sports until you are at that stage in life, because you have to obviously decide that you want to get into gun ownership, and then there's a whole process that goes into getting your PAL, and then you have to have the disposable income to join a club, and sometimes that's not a very straightforward process. Sometimes that might take up to 6 months or more. And then you buy in the case of a lot of shooting sports, a restricted firearm, and that's a whole process unto itself. And then the club might have further requirements to be able to get your authorization to transport for that club. And even today, now after C42, there's still a lot of confusion as to what clubs are to do with the automatic authorizations. And it's a whole process. From day one, when you decide you want to get into the shooting sports, it might be a year or more before you're actually on the range shooting.
Yeah, I'd say about a year.
Yeah, a year is about what I've seen with new gun owners.
And then with clubs in Ontario, I can't speak for other provinces, but in Ontario, there's a waiting period to get into that club, and then usually there's about a year worth of probationary periods that you have to go through before you have 100% unrestricted access to the ranges.
Yep.
So yeah, you're right. Probably about 2 years before you're full out there doing what you feel is,
Yeah, so it's certainly not something you can pick up on a whim, where you might go out and buy a pair of skis and then try it for a summer and then they sit in your basement the rest of your life. It's not something like that. So it's a commitment that you have to kind of psych yourself up for and then double down on and make it happen. And so it just so happens to be that people with disposable income. So that's why you see a lot of people that aren't until they're 26, 27, 28, after they've come out of school and they have a stable job where they might actually be able to come out on a regular basis and start participating in the shooting sports.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I have a positive story as well. I was at my club this weekend, taking out my new pistol to try it out, and I ran into a group of young individuals, probably about 20, 22, and they were all had their firearm license for a couple of years, and they were all kind of tactically action shooting kind of guys, and they were shooting in the bay next to me, and they all had your typical VZ58s, CZ858s, SKSs, that kind of stuff. A couple had ARs as well. They all had the restricteds. They all had pistols as well. And they were a diverse group of individuals, all young, like I said, but one of them was still in university. The others had just graduated and were on their way in their careers. And I thought that was really nice to see guys that young getting that involved so quickly in the sport. And they were all, I think they were all holster qualified. I thought that was really neat. It was.
That's always good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That is very good. We are pretty lucky, at least at the Glove Club, Jeff. We do have so part of my role at our gun club, in addition to being on the board of directors, I'm involved in a lot of the safety programs at our club. So I see a lot of the brand new people that are on our new member orientation course, and I also see everybody that does their range safety officer program for our club. And when I run a range safety course for new range safety officers, it's a 10-person program, and out of those we usually see one that's a woman, which I mean is not bad, because when we do the indoctrination for the initial new membership, that sort of first orientation to the club safety, we usually do it as a 30-person class, and we might have one, maybe two women, usually spouses. It's very, very rarely single women, and it's very rarely children. So we do typically have people that are, I would say, middle-aged is our new shooter demographic, sort of mid-30s into their 50s. But the vast majority of them, I would say, are new firearms owners. We don't have a lot of people that have a lot of experience. We'll have maybe 25 to 40% of the class as people that have moved and are looking for a new club, and then 60+% of the class is people that are new to guns altogether. So we do have that variety of both men and women. We don't seem to get a lot of children out, or I guess I shouldn't say children, young people. There's very rarely anyone in a safety class that would be like my or Tyler's age. Like it's very rare to see anyone under 30. But we do have a couple of families that come out, and it's nice to see that we have a husband, wife, and a daughter that comes out to shoot. Or one of our action shooting fellows, he has a daughter that comes out to the range with him. I think she must be high school age, and she shoots a little bit. So we do get that sort of cross spectrum of Canadian society, but we don't get nearly as many people that have access to firearms come out to the club as could be, at least according to the numbers for how many households have guns. I don't see these people out shooting. I don't see them at matches or competitions. We are lucky with groups like the Ontario Rifle Association going. If you go up to CFB Borden to go to a CQB match, if you see 40 or 50 people on the line shooting CQB, you'll probably see 3 or 4 women.
Yeah, and even generations of families there.
Oh, absolutely. The ORA is huge for that. Again, for CQB, it's not uncommon to have grandparents there with their children and grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we do have that sort of cross spectrum, but it's just not. It's not as wide as I would like to see it. And I think part of it is definitely a barrier to entry, and I think the other part of it is the geographic issue, because you tend to have gun clubs in rural areas, and rural areas tend to be populated by white Canadians that have been here for generations. You don't have the diversity that you have in downtown Toronto.
Yep.
I think if you had a club in downtown Toronto, say, I don't know, let's say on top of Union Station there used to be a gun club there. I think if you still had a gun club there, I think you would see a much wider spectrum of Canadians because there is a larger immigrant community and a larger non-white community in the downtown core.
Oh, for sure. And I've done a lot of training courses with TDSA, and they do all their training. Initially, they were doing it at the Hamilton Anglers and Hunters Association, But this in the last year or so, they've switched to doing them at Silverdale and East Elgin. And East Elgin is, it's right outside of London, so it's a university town, so it gets a little bit more diverse. But Silverdale is like it's a pilgrimage that Toronto shooters make. That is the club to go to for a lot of guys. And when I did courses there, I would say 50% or more were people from other ethnic backgrounds, whether that was Indian or East Asian. Lots of people from with Chinese backgrounds and Filipino backgrounds for sure.
Yeah, we've definitely, or at least I've noticed that, especially in the IPSC community, that Filipino, Chinese, East Asian community is very much into their IPSC. We tend to see a lot of them, and they tend to be very family oriented. A lot of the time, you'll come to our club, and you'll see somebody there shooting, and it's them and 3 of their friends and their wives and a bunch of kids running around, and it's very much a family activity.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the guys that came out, he must have done 3 of the 4 courses I did with TDSA this year. Every time he came out for a class, his father was there just to watch. And then we're talking about a guy who's like, 25 to 30. It's not like he was like 16 and his father just wanted to make sure everything was okay and safe. He just wanted to, see what it was all about because he was interested in getting into it himself.
Well, that's excellent. Not to go on and on about Guelph, but this weekend at our club, we're hosting, I believe it's the University of Guelph, as a group of students that come, I don't know, Andrew, what is it?
That's right. It's the University of Guelph Outdoors Club, and they come a couple of times a year, and it is, I would say, a predominantly white group of students, but it is very evenly spread between male and female. I would say probably 1/3 of the people that show up are women, young women. Yeah. And they always have a blast when they come out. We set them up with 22 caliber firearms, handguns and rifles, and we shoot on the indoor range, and everybody has eye and ear protection, and they have their own range safety officer there with them that walks them through it. And I think this weekend will probably be about their 4th, maybe their 5th visit to the club.
Yeah.
And by 22, do you mean 22 rimfire or 22 fun fire?
No, rimfire.
I'm sorry, 22 rimfire on our indoor pistol range.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, it's up to the board asks for volunteers, and the volunteers we bring our own firearms, and the club gives us the ammunition. And I brought up the point of why I love shooting 45s, 1911s, and I said maybe I could bring a 45, and I've been told, well, if you provide your own ammunition, yeah, go ahead. So you know what? Maybe one day I will. But we don't want to scare them off either with bigger calibers and louder noises.
No. 45, I load my own 45 and I use shotgun powder. And I find that the recoil impulse is very soft. It's softer shooting than a lot of 9mm that I've shot, my 1911. So, if you're doing your own hand loads for new shooters, you can make a 45 very enjoyable for a nervous and new shooter.
Yeah, that's true. Well, or 357 with 38 special, right?
Yep.
I mean, I've got a cowboy load that's probably it's just a powder puff load. It's 3.
Yeah.
What's that? A primer and 1 grain?
Yeah,
that's 3 grains.
Bullseye loads.
Sorry, 3 grains. Yeah. So I mean, we do have that, and I would like to see more gun clubs have that sort of community outreach. I mean, I belong to other gun clubs, and they are not at all involved. Guelph does have that positive outreach within the community. We've had the Boy Scout troops out. We've regularly had the university students come out. I don't think that as a community that firearms owners and gun clubs in particular are especially accessible. I mean, we're generally out of the way. We're out in the country. You have to drive to be able to get there. There's a huge barrier to entry, both in time and cost. And then once you finally get your license and you can go and buy the gun and you can afford to buy the ammo, then there's the huge barrier to entry to the actual clubs. And I think this all works against us.
I find firearms owners in general, and this is kind of a very generalized statement I'm making, they have a tendency to be very private about their own affairs as well, and that might be in part due to some of the scrutiny that they've been subject to. But you get the, the polar opposite of that sometimes. Like my club, it's both a hunting and a fishing club, and we have a fish hatchery and release salmon and whatnot into the river. We sell raffle tickets for boats and ATVs and stuff, and the local Canadian Tire lets us set up like right in the store. How every winter all the garbage and stuff that flies out of trucks, beds, and people that they whip it out their windows and stuff. It ends up in the snowbanks, and then when the snowbanks recede, you have piles of trash in the gutters. I know our club goes right into town in Owen Sound, and we help clean it all up. It's very good PR and just kind of being a part of the community. I think that's a part of attracting people to the shooting sports is maintaining that positive image.
That definitely is. I think that we, as gun owners, need to have groups of people that are more involved in the community and doing that sort of outreach. The Adopt a Highway program, or being involved in going to Canadian Tires to do raffles, or involving university
kids hockey team. How about that?
Yes, sponsoring a hockey. Absolutely. There needs to be more positive ways for us to be involved in the community than as strictly we're a group of people with guns.
Yep.
Does anybody else have anything on the topic of being old and white?
All I can say is that, fellas out there, throw the money down and buy your lady a gun. I think shooting is objectively enjoyable as long as you introduce people to the sport kind of in an appropriate manner. Start them out with a 22 and then gradually build up as their confidence builds. My girlfriend, I started her with a 22. Now she shoots a Smith & Wesson M&P 9, and I got her a 20-gauge shotgun because I wanted her to get into turkey hunting, and she actually shot a shotgun match with it, and she did very well. And she enjoys it, and she's trying to get her like her best friend out into it. And I actually spoke with the best friend's boyfriend, and now he's come to me because he wants to buy an AR. He had a PAL, but he only had a couple hunting rifles. So these are the kinds of steps that you have to take to grow the sport. And in the case of the two people I just mentioned, yeah, they're both white, but we got to grow the sport, and everybody brings their friends with them and their family members, and then the diversity comes with it. It follows. It's a changing country, so that's only going to follow with it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Definitely. Okay, so we'll wrap up the main topic then, and we'll move on to the widget of the week. So for our bustling YouTube audience of 3 people, I'm holding something up, and for our audio listeners, it's a red block of plastic. This is an AR-15 firearm lock. It's the mag lock. This particular one is from Select Shooting Supplies. Dean Carr at Select is getting a free plug today just because I like the guy. Select Shooting Supplies is my local gun store in Cambridge, Ontario, and I actually won the AR-15 firearms lock as a prize at a match that Select Shooting Supplies had sponsored. So the way that this works is there's a button on the bottom that engages a rod inside of the lock to hold the bolt to the rear, and it goes in just the same way that you would insert a regular magazine. I'm opposed to the idea of being forced to lock my firearms, but since I keep my firearms locked up and I want to keep people away from my firearms, this is my preferred choice for locking up the AR-15 over the trigger lock. So this goes in, and then the ARs go into the safe, and these are all key to like, which is fantastic. So it's one key to open all of my ARs.
That's actually really good to know that they're key to like, because that's always been the thing that shies people away from keyed locks, is they don't want to have 20 keys on their key ring.
No, definitely, and that's why I like these in particular. So I have a set of key to like trigger locks for all of my handguns, and then all of my ARs have the key to like AR-15 mag lock locks. So you lock the bolt to the rear, put it in, push the button, it locks the bolt back. You can't separate the upper and lower receiver. You can't engage the fire control group, and being all key to like, it's really easy to have 2 keys now. So one for my regular trigger lock and one for my AR locks to carry around with me. I don't have to have 15 different keys.
Yeah, I mean, not to be a shill or anything, but at one point I had 9 guns that took AR-15 mags, so that that type of lock would be a huge asset to people like me.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I wanted to bring it up as this week's widget of the week. Getting these through Select Shooting Supplies, and there'll be a link in the show notes. Individually, they're $35. They also sell them as a 3-pack for $100, or if you're particularly lucky like me, you win them at shooting matches.
Or if you're like me, you get them with your Colt Canada SA-20.
Oh, nice.
We don't all get paid enough to buy Colts.
Excellent.
All right, so that is our widget of the week, and we're on to rapid fire. This is listener feedback. So we'll start with email feedback. This is from Rob. And Rob says, Andrew, you're going to give yourself aneurysm. You didn't swear once. So thanks, Rob. Rob is someone that we shoot with at the Guelph Gun Club, and I think Rob is used to me being a little bit more animated.
Yeah, I think Rob's correct. Anybody who's seen you shouting into a megaphone in the style of Tim shooting at the ORA would know what Rob's talking about.
Part of the goal of this podcast is to reach the widest demographic possible. So much like Tyler, I'm doing my very best to keep the cursing to a minimum.
Well,
I keep a pillow close by so I can scream and swear into it whenever I feel the urge.
Or you could learn to curse in Mandarin.
Widest possible audience. We want everyone to listen.
Okay. All right.
Okay. The next email we got from Sharp97. And Sharp says, hey guys, love the show, haven't finished it, but I was hoping you'd get yourselves added to Stitcher, please. This would very much help me listen to you guys as I don't always have internet. Thanks in advance. So for Sharp97 and for everyone else out in podcast land, the iTunes and Stitcher feeds are coming. It's a little bit cumbersome to get yourselves added to the iTunes store, I've discovered, but it is something on my to-do list.
Have you successfully submitted the podcast? Is it pending approval, or...?
I think it is pending approval. I've submitted it. I don't know if I was successful.
Okay, you should have an email from the iTunes team saying, it's pending review, stand by.
Okay, I'll have to have a look for that. So that
yeah,
is
we'll talk about it after the show if you want.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So the iTunes and Stitcher feeds are coming. For the time being, the show is available through direct download at our website at CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. The RSS feeds are up. There's an RSS feed for everything that gets posted to the website, and there's also an audio-only feed for the edited version of the show. And of course, we're available. We're going to aim for Monday nights at 9 o'clock on YouTube to do the live show with the panel. So that's Monday nights, 9 o'clock on YouTube, and the channel is Canadian Patriot Podcast. And we'll try and put that up in social media. Last week's YouTube comments, the only comment we have on YouTube last week was from Rick. And he says, excellent job, gentlemen. The infiltration angle could well be the key to this dilemma. And I think we covered that pretty in-depth last week, and I think that the three of us on the panel this evening are all in agreement that non-compliance and infiltration into the current political party is going to be the way that we go to influence policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And then the live YouTube this evening, we've got a message from Adam. He says, hey guys, shout out the next hangout on Instagram next time. I'm not on there every day, but I'm on there every day, but Facebook not so much. For the time being, we don't have an Instagram account. If Instagram is really that popular, I'm sure we can get one. You can follow my website, edtacticool, on Instagram and Twitter. But we're not currently using that to promote this podcast. That's something that we can look into if that's what the community wants. That's what the community will get. Also from Adam, where can I find this podcast for my drive to work? And I think we just covered that. Podcast is currently available for direct download on CanadianPatriotPodcast.com and will soon be available on iTunes and Stitcher. Do you gentlemen have any shout-outs to anyone?
No, no one in particular. I haven't told anybody that I was on the show other than people on my direct Facebook feed.
Right on.
Because my podcast, it's a slow editing process, so I haven't released any episodes since we recorded the last one. So I haven't been able to plug what I've done.
Well, we'll look forward to getting that plugged. I also want to thank Slamfire Radio and Trevor and his squirrel moment on last week's episode of Slamfire. I think it was 143, but don't quote me on that. He had mentioned Canadian Patriot Podcast, and I wanted to thank him for that. He also did eventually remember my name, which was even better since I've talked to him on a couple of occasions, so I'm glad he sort of remembers who I am. And I think he also mentioned we're not on iTunes. It's coming. I promise. It will be on iTunes eventually. For the time being, check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast, or our homepage, CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to cover before we close out the show?
No, well, I think I'd like to let everybody know that I'm going to be shooting in the next Team Hoser match. And if there's any shooters out there, action shooters, they should come out and give it a try. I believe this one's going to be a rifle-pistol match.
Oh, rifle pistol.
It's going to be held at Guelph. Oh, sorry. It's going to be shotgun pistol. It's going to be held at Guelph, and I believe the date is November 21st. Yeah, that's a Saturday. So, yeah, it'll be going on Gun Nuts pretty soon, I think. So set that date aside.
Great. So that'll be November 21st, two-gun match at Guelph run by Team Hoser. And you said, sorry, Jeff, that was rifle-pistol?
No, sorry. It is going to be shotgun and pistol, I believe.
Shotgun pistol.
And Andrew, you're going to be ROing as well, so make sure you're free.
I will get back to you and Steve about that just as soon as I check the calendar and with the missus.
Right. I'll just take this opportunity again to reiterate, fellas, get a crowbar out, pry open that wallet, and buy your ladies a handgun or an AR or something, and get some women into the shooting sports. Because I think we talk about things like firearms for self-defense a lot, and the media and politicians often dismiss us by saying, "Oh, just be a man and fight off your attacker." It's hard to deliver that line of logic to a 5'2", 115-pound lady. So we need more women involved for sure, and this is just it's just one more aspect to grow the sport. They're 50% of the country, 51% of the country.
Yep.
So
and while you've got that wallet open, also join some of our organizations that help protect our rights, whether it's the NFA or the CSSA. Or the newly created, what's it called again?
CCFR.
That's right, the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, along with the National Firearms Organization and the Canadian Shooting Sports Organization.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money.
The Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money to join all three, and you're tripling down on protecting your rights.
Good stuff. Tyler, if people want to stay in touch with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
You can grab me on Facebook. I don't hide who I am. Tyler Gerard on Facebook. Come find me. I do my own podcast, the International Liberty or Death Podcast. You can find that on Facebook or on Instagram and Twitter at Liberty Podcast. And we throw an episode out every 2 weeks or so.
Great. And Jeff, the best place to find you is still on Gun Nuts?
On Gun Nuts is Mississauga Gun Nut, or come to Guelph on November 21st.
All right. Jeff will be the angry dude with the whistle, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll be kicking ass in the manual division for shotgun.
Right on. I'm, of course, Andrew, and you can find my work on everydaytactical.com, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at edtactical. So for our listeners this evening, we'd like to thank you for joining us. The panelists, Tyler and Jeff, thank you again for being on with me this week. And for our listeners, remember, you are the true north, strong and free. Thank you, and we'll see you all again next week.